Hello, and welcome to the reporting episode of the International Society of Explosive Engineers web series, Explosives Every Day, which looks at how explosives are used in a wide range of applications. I'm Alistair Torrance, President of the ISEE. Our organisation started in 1974 when a group of like-minded people got together in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to discuss how to better apply commercial explosives and how to champion the blaster in the field. Move forward to today, and we're an international organisation with more than 4,000 members spread over 90 countries with a mission to advance the science and art of explosive engineering worldwide. We do this through sharing our knowledge and providing training and education for everyone involved with blasting. We also have a strong education foundation and have awarded more than $1 million in scholarships to our students in our industry. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our series partners, Dyno Nobel, OPIT Blast and LDE Global. This series would not have been possible without their tremendous support. This episode focuses on reporting and will touch on the approval process for putting together blasting projects and the regulations that govern how explosives are handled to ensure safety. Our reporting sponsor is Nobel Insurance, and here's a little bit more about them.
For more than 40 years, Nobel has provided quality insurance focused on meeting the needs of commercial explosives manufacturers, distributors, and drilling and blasting contractors across the U.S. They complement their insurance coverages with unparalleled benefits and services to help you effectively manage risk, improve regulatory compliance, and maximize your company's profitability. No insurance company knows explosives better.
This episode's presenters are Kelly Ratliff and Ralph Burnham from Reminger, and Joseph Meyers, Chief of the Explosives Unit of the Fire Department of New York. Kelly and Ralph are attorneys at Reminger. They specialise in the representation of commercial explosive and blasting companies involving blasting, construction, mining, and transport-related issues in both state and federal courts throughout the United States. They also advise and consult with clients from the industry on a wide range of blasting issues and topics associated with risk mitigation, procedures, compliance, and public relations. Both are members of the ISEE and certified in practical blasting fundamentals. Their presentation will provide an overview of the uses of explosives and the regulations that govern the manufacture, selling, transportation and detonation of explosives, and how companies and regulators work to ensure the safety of those who use explosives and to the public. Chief Joe Meyers has over 30 years' experience supervising and managing blasting operations. He manages the explosives unit of the Fire Department of New York City. In this role, he has the oversight responsibility for all explosives and flammables in New York, including blasting, pyrotechnics, fireworks, ammunition, and explosive escorts. And by that I mean the movement of explosives throughout the city. He's a licensed blaster and a pyrotechnician in several states, an explosive ordnance disposal instructor, as well as a certified National Fire Explosives Investigator and instructor. He's a member of the ISEE and a number of other important industry-related associations. Joe will explain the proper communication and business skills needed to successfully achieve regulatory approval of blasting, pyrotechnic and fireworks projects in New York City. He'll talk about proven techniques that have worked well to improve communication, cooperation and compliance. And he'll share some rare behind-the-scenes footage of several projects he's been part of in New York City. There's going to be a question and answer session with the presenters right after these presentations. The panel will discuss many questions that were asked by a live audience at the time of this episode's first airing.
Hi, I'm Ralph Burnham.
And I'm Kelly Ratliff.
We are attorneys with the law firm of Reminger, with offices all through the Midwest, about 14 different offices through Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, and we're here today to talk about blasting and blasting regulation. Kelly and I have about 30 years combined experience in defending blasting companies, explosive manufacturers, as well as individual blasters.
And what we've found in that experience is that the blasting industry is truly one of the most heavily regulated industries in the world, if not the most heavily regulated. There are numerous federal, state, and local agencies that regulate and inspect the explosives industry, from the manufacturer of the explosives product all the way until the explosive is detonated on a site.
And all those regulations are designed to protect the public as well as those that are involved in the explosives industry from any dangers involving explosives.
And the regulations have truly evolved over time. They're constantly changing, as with most things. As the research continues and technology advances, the explosives industry changes and advances with it, and so do the regulations that govern that.
And as a result, blasting is getting safer and safer and more professional, and we're seeing that industry-wide, I think, Kelly.
Absolutely. Ralph and I want to talk a little bit about the regulations and how the regulations are enforced. And it starts with the regulatory agencies. And all across the nation, there are multiple levels of regulatory agencies that inspect and implement and enforce the laws that govern blasting operations and commercial explosives. And it starts at the federal level, and probably the most well-known is the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. They govern all aspects of the explosives industry, and perhaps a less well-known is also the Department of Transportation, the DOT, which also governs the transportation and storage of explosives materials.
And then on the state level, there are state agencies involved to regulate not only the blasting industry and the use of commercial explosives, but also to regulate and to certify individual blasters to do blaster retraining, blaster education, as well as to make sure that blasting is done in a safe way to protect structures near the blasting from any potential damage to the blasting from vibrations or other activities that you normally associate with blasting.
As well as the individuals who are transporting and detonating the explosives.
And then in some areas we see it even on a further lower level down to the city level, where you'll have city inspectors or city fire marshals who will further govern blasting and make sure that it's done in a safe way to protect the public. As Kelly and I have already mentioned, one of the aspects of blasting is the extreme amount of regulation that goes on within the blasting industry. And that is from the time the blasting material is manufactured to its transportation to its ultimate use by a blasting company on a construction job or a mine or wherever it may be used.
And the main form of that documentation is reports. And the rules and the regulations require that reports be maintained at all levels of this, and they must be maintained for a certain period of time. That varies state by state. It typically ranges anywhere from 2 years to 5 years. But a key aspect of that is that those reports and those documents have to be made available for inspection at any point in time by the regulatory agencies. Without notice, any regulatory agency can show up and they can ask to see the records, and those have to be made available.
That's exactly right. So the way that this works is when a blasting company designs or detonates a shot, what they do is they create a record of that shot, and then that record becomes part of the files of that blasting company or that particular blaster. And at any time, a regulatory agency can come and say, show me your blast records. And what they'll be looking for is to make sure that the blasting is done in a safe way, in a way that's designed to protect properties around the blast area from any potential damage from the blasting that's being done. And those records, as Kelly mentioned, are essentially public records. They have to be produced at any time, and they have to be maintained by the blasting and the company doing the blasting work.
And if at any point in time a regulator determines that something is missing or something is inaccurate in that record, the company and the individual using the explosives, they can be cited, and they're subject to various penalties. That can be anything ranging from a fine to a suspension of their license, a revocation of their license, and in, I think, the rare but more extreme instances, the company and or the individual can be subject to criminal penalties as well.
That's exactly right. And what we see a lot is that especially the federal agencies will want to make sure that the amount of explosives that is leaving the factory that's being transported to the end user matches the amount of explosives that's actually being used in the blasting work itself. So they will look at not only the blast records, but the transportation records as well, make sure those match up, make sure that every piece of explosive material is being accounted for. Again, those are measures that are designed for the safety of the public. What we see here is a typical blast record, and what you can tell from the blast record is the amount of material that has to go into the record itself. Now, the material required varies on a state-by-state basis, but at a minimum, it includes the date of the shot, it includes the amount of explosive materials, it includes the delay, which is an important indicator of vibration. It also includes information about where the nearest protected structure is. So it shows that the blasting company with a particular blaster on each individual shot is taking into consideration those properties that are around the shot and then reflecting that information on this record. So what it shows to the end user or the regulatory agency that's looking at this record is that the blaster took into consideration what is the potential of my shot in terms of causing vibration damage, and then reflecting that on his record, he took that into consideration and designed a shot that could be detonated safely with minimal vibrations with no possibility of damage to somebody else's structure. And that's key in the blasting industry as far as what we strive to do, which is protect the public.
And as Ralph mentioned, the information that's required to be maintained on this document varies state by state, but in essentially all states, I think the minimum we've seen is over 20 different topics or areas of information that have to be included in those shot reports.
So what we see in our 30 years of combined practice is that our clients, blasting companies, by and large, try to maintain a level of professionalism and perform their work in a way that really is done safely, done pursuant to regulations, and done in a way that they are a good neighbor and they're not causing damage to others' properties.
And I think most companies view the extreme amount of regulations and laws that govern the industry as essentially the minimum requirements of what they have to do and what they have to meet. And most go above and beyond those minimum requirements. As Ralph mentioned, they want to be good neighbors, and the folks that work for the explosives companies, the owners, the managers, and the blasters, they're normal people, but they're professionals. They're highly trained, they're very skilled, and each year they're required to attend continuing education classes to stay up to date on changes in regulations, advances in technology, and anything that helps to improve the explosives industry and make it safer.
That's exactly right. And so what we see a lot of times is you'll have these regulations in place by these state agencies or by a federal agency, and what the blasters will do is they'll come in there and they'll say, okay, I can use up to this amount of explosives, and they'll cut it by half or cut it by a third because they want to be able to design a shot that is not capable of causing damage to somebody else's structure. And that information is then contained on those blast records. And as we mentioned earlier, those blast records are the key. They really establish the work that these folks do to try to protect those who own properties nearby the blasting from any potential damage.
And as with most industries, as the technology advances and research continues, the explosives industry continues to change with it. But the detonation of explosives is certainly not like what is portrayed in the movies. And I think what is considered an explosive and the various ways explosives are used and the day-to-day regulations of it may be surprising. And I think here to talk about that is someone who has much more experience with boots on the ground than Ralph and I.
Hello everyone, Joe Meyers, Chief of the FDNY Explosives Unit. The Explosives Unit in New York City oversees all the commercial blasting in the 5 boroughs, all the pyrotechnics, all the fireworks, all the ammunition, anything to do with explosives in the city. We also are in charge of all the permitting, licensing, actually code review, code revision. So we have a lot on our plate. We do all the investigations as well. First slide you're going to see is actually from the World Trade Center. That was where I finished my career as a commercial blaster for over 20 years in New York City. I was actually the lead blaster general foreman on that job. And I worked on that job for approximately 7 years for the new towers, bring the elevations down to grade. On areas that hadn't been previously blasted, where the towers hadn't existed and the reflecting pools are now. Also for the new foundations was a different design than the old towers. Next slide, you see me, actually, that's me priming some shots over at the World Trade Center on the right. On the left is Port Authority. That was a job for the to put a tunnel boring machine in the pit and assemble it so it could go from Penn Station to Grand Central Station. That was a very intricate job because we had the general public on one side of the wall, 5 feet away from the cut, waiting for their buses, and we had on the other wall the buses running back and forth. We also started the job with about a 20-foot distance to the ceiling, which the ceiling contained all the gas mains, water mains, electric, and so on. So obviously we had to practice everything completely safe and no room for error. We all have different lanes of explosives, and it's going to take a long time to get the experience and the education. So even in one lane takes many, many, many years. So you have your different uses, high explosives, non-detonating cartridges, which obviously have to be also handled correctly by licensed personnel. They have a benefit of reduced vibration. Every product is great in the right hands. Next is we have the military ordnance for explosive ordnance disposal, breaching, boiler cleaning, which uses a binary product, and fireworks and pyrotechnics. Next slide is just some good advice when you start a job. My buddy Red Adair, who is famous for capping oil wells with explosives, I'll read his quote: "If you think it's expensive to hire a professional to do the job, wait till you hire an amateur." Very true. Make sure you always have subject matter experts at your disposal. Network with them. Whenever we do a job, even when I review something, I always do send it for a peer review to some of the people that I respect and some of the top subject matter experts in the world. And if we all come back with the same answer and we all come back with the same numbers, usually have a pretty good plan. Nothing's perfect because, as we know, explosives 50% experience and 50% science. Never think you know everything. But if you do hire people based on price and not expertise, you're going to run into problems. It may be cheap in the front end, but you're going to pay on the back end. Next is George Bernard's short quote, especially nowadays with electronic equipment and all the emailing and so on. Things are taken out of context, misinterpreted. And what he said was, the problem with communication is the illusion that it has been accomplished. A lot of times you think you spoke to somebody, you got your point across, but you didn't. That's why communication is so important, especially what we do in the city. I just get everybody in the same room so everybody hears the same thing. We have one big meeting at Office of Emergency Management. All the stakeholders, all the regulators, anyone who has a interest in the project. We're all there to answer any questions. Same thing if we have to go to a community board meeting. We're all there. We all answer the questions and make sure we address everything, and usually walk out of there and you're able to issue a permit at that point. Once all the paperwork's in, all the stakeholders and all the whole process has been completed, and you have your final meeting. Very important. Definitely a good practice. Get everybody in the same room and have your meeting. Nowadays, a little different. You may have to do it virtually, but give her an opportunity to hear. Instead of one person has a little of the information, another person has some of the other information. You have a meeting with 2 people, then another one with 3, and you string out the process for months instead of what could take weeks. Next is the result of bad communication. There you go. If you don't deal with the regulators, if you don't talk to them, if you don't give them the right information. I know sometimes it's difficult. I happen to have come from the industry, which many regulators didn't. So you may have to educate them a little and talk a little, not so much in technical terms, so that they understand exactly what you're talking about. And make sure you're getting the information in a timely manner. But this is what happens. You have a big explosion when communication is not done correctly or not communicated. This was actually a shot from 125th Street on the river, on the Hudson River, for a TV show. That was det cord at the top here, 100 grain det cord, some black powder mortars, which is naphthalene, black powder, and gasoline. So that's what happens. All right, so one main thing, keep an open line of communication with the AHJ. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to call them. Don't be afraid to ask them to come out and look at something. I'm a firm believer in going out physically and looking at something rather than talking back and forth on emails and text and spending an inordinate amount of time when you could resolve it immediately with just one visit. So, when you get out there, introduce yourself, make sure you know the regulatory requirements, and learn about the approval process. Best resource for that is a regulator. Call them up, get to know them. It's a lot easier to have when you have a relationship with somebody to get things done in a timely manner. Had a lot of issues in New York for these reasons. That's why I know, because it's held up some projects. It's cost projects money. It's got projects not approved, which would have been approved had they followed this process. So very important. It's a shame when something gets denied just because somebody didn't have good communication or understand what's going on, or they didn't hire the subject matter expert. All right, prior to submitting your approval, complete the overall design. Everybody knows when you submit a blast plan, make sure that the plan is inclusive. It doesn't have to be too technical, because as we know in explosives, things change. Once you get out there, you're actually doing the job, the rock's going to change, the environment's going to change. So we have to submit a good blast plan. All right, that's the start. Keep the lines of communication over. Have your plan peer reviewed. We all don't know everything. I'm all learning every day. So make sure that they look at it. Then usually you'll have a decent plan in place to get approved. All right. In summary, determine the licensing permit requirements. The HJ we spoke about. Establish blasting operation protocols for your project that you can share. Keep the transparent. Keep the lines of communication open. And make sure that you work as a team. I appreciate all your time today. Now we're going to have some fun. We're going to watch some interesting videos, and these are the projects I've worked on. We do everything, like I told you, for the movie industry, including body burns. So this first slide you're going to see is a body burn. That is a stunt woman. She is doing a full body burn. The car is used to ignite it is gasoline, pyrogel, rubber cement. That is initiated by an electronic system using a squib or an electric match. A squib is just a small explosive. When you see somebody get shot in the movies, that's a squib. That's a little blood bag with a little explosive that blows the bag through the shirt. And then she will have many layers of clothing, some wet, some dry, made of Nomex, which is what race car drivers wear, so it's flame resistant. It could be Kevlar. There's different types of material. She is fully protected. There's also a special gels that they put on any exposed skin, such as their face or their arms. I've actually used it myself. It's pretty amazing. You could put it on your arm, light your arm on fire, and you won't feel any heat or get burnt for, it could be 2-3 minutes, believe it or not. Pretty amazing stuff. Technology is amazing when used correctly. The next one you're going to see is a building explosion. This is simulated. Again, use a propane cannon, which is basically a propane tank or an accumulator attached to a large funnel where propane is propelled through the tube, and a electronic system, a squib or an electric match, is used to ignite the propane once it's expelled from this funnel at the end of these tubes, and it produces giant fireballs and a little explosion, and then all that debris and all that stuff you see is all movie magic. Rubber glass, balsa wood, foam, nothing dangerous. Okay, and then the next one is this car explosion. This was a Aggerfish, Brooklyn Navy Yard. Again, black powder bombs, lift charges, so on. You may recognize it. That was from that was a area. It was used for John Wick movies. Another Queens explosion, and as you can see, very close proximate. Again, using various types of explosives. Det cord can be used, black powder, so on. But anything in the hands of a professional, that's the key. All right, you do this without a professional, big problems. Next is a little movie magic, car over the mountain. Oh, flip right over the mountain. Next is another car explosion, which was a small one for a old movie set in the 70s. And the one you're going to see next is the barges, which is 3 barges on the Hudson River. That was filmed from the 101st floor of Hudson Yards, which was the building project that was built over the railroad yards, which still exist under the building. So it had to be basically suspended in air over the railroad yards. That was from the 101st floor. That was from an award show. As you can see, that's the 3 barges contain various size shells from anything from 3 inches up to 10 inches. Interesting bit of trivia. That show, which will last about, that was about 5 minutes total. Maybe 5,000 devices, where the Macy's show has over 100,000. Okay, and the next one is basically sums up 2020. 2020 was rough. Hopefully 2021 is better. But this was using 5,000 feet of det cord, propane poppers, mortars. The det cord was anywhere from 25 grain to 100 grain. So watch and enjoy. Everybody have a great 2021. Appreciate all your time. And thank you again. And everybody stay safe. And my phone is always on if anybody wants to reach out and needs any type of information, or I can help you with anything. So take care and be well, be safe.
I think that has demonstrated how much reporting is required in our industry to make sure that everything goes according to plan. Our question and answer session with moderator Travis Davidsaver, ISEE board member and emerging professionals section chairperson, begins now. So take it away, Travis.
Let's talk live with our panelist Joe, who's in New York City, and Kelly and Ralph, who are in Kentucky. We're all ready for your questions. We're excited to have so many of you on from around the world this evening, this morning, today, whatever time it happens to be. So as you ask your question, please let us know where you're from. And if you have a specific question for one of our panelists, let us know who it's for. Please send any of your questions via the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. Our first question this evening is for Ralph and Kelly, and it's from Jerry in Washington. Jerry's asking, he says during his career, he's worked on in several states that the ATF does not require, or the states don't require blasting records, and the ATF does not require or regulate blast records. So how can they demand to see records in places where no one is required to keep them?
I think in our experience, the states that we deal with typically do require blast records to be maintained. There may be some states out west, for example, that don't. But maintaining blast records obviously is critical, not just on the regulatory side, but also on the litigation side. In the event a lawsuit is filed, the only way Kelly and I can defend a case if there's a blast record that's maintained. So in our experience, even in those states where there may not be a requirement, the blasters will maintain those records, and they'll keep them for as long as they need to be able to defend against litigation.
All right. Our next question is for all three of you, and the question might be different depending on where you're at. The question is, it starts with the statement, we see a lot of those blasting mats on shots. Are they part of any regulation, or does the contractor decide when to use them?
I'll answer that, Travis. They have to use them. It is in the New York City regulation. It just doesn't tell you how to use them. It's basically the blaster will cover under the supervision of the regulators in the city, which is the explosives unit. And it's very important, as we know, for the simple reason is even if the blaster happens to make a mistake with the timing or something, that will cover it and prevent any rifling or fly rock from causing any damage.
And I would just add that in some states it's not required. Individual blast plans may require it. We see it in more urban and populated areas, but there are certainly, even if not required, there are times where blasters and blasting companies will use them just as an added safety precaution for the shot.
Certainly. So our next question here is for Ralph and Kelly, and it comes from Kathy in New Mexico. What has been your most challenging alleged blasting case?
That's a great question, Kathy. Thank you. In our experience in doing this, we mostly see alleged blasting claims. Actual blasting damage is fairly rare and usually involves fly rock. The most unusual cases I think we've seen, we had a case in Minnesota that involved an avalanche that occurred within seconds after a surface shot and involved about 50 homes, where we had to go through and analyze the likelihood of any damage to these 50 homes. We've had cases involving over 100 homes in Missouri. Landslides. I would say any case that involves a thorough analysis of the blast vibrations and then an evaluation of what may actually be involved and any mechanism behind the damage is a very challenging case. And obviously, when you get to that many homes, they become challenging cases.
Certainly. I know I had the opportunity to work with you, Ralph, on that case in Minnesota where the earthquake appeared to happen about 8 seconds after the quarry shot and was felt as far away as a couple states. And clearly the physics don't work out on that one. So
fascinating. Any case, any claim that involves that amount of engineering is one that's challenging, but the science is there within the blasting industry to defend those type claims, fortunately.
Sure. And Joe, what's the most unusual thing you've seen in your career in New York involving explosives?
Yeah, well, we know everything's unusual in New York City, so there's been plenty. Usually it's the near misses, which is the most interesting, I think, and with explosives, especially in the pyrotechnic industry. You'll never hear about it because it never happened. Nobody got injured, so you never hear about those incidents. But I think the one was was a giant pumpkin for Letterman. We were wiring the inside with a det cord. Yeah, so could have been a disaster. Happened to be it was a wet on the sidewalk. There was a little puddle, and somebody dropped something, went to pick it up, and they got a shock. And it turns out there was an unlabeled high voltage room right next to Letterman Stage Door on 53rd Street. And we immediately got the power out of there, so nothing happened. But what's interesting is a lot of people, the old days was electric. And the power industry used electric initiators. So we're aware of that. And these days, if you use it, a lot of people haven't used it. We still use it occasionally in blasting. So you just got to never get complacent and, learn every method you can. So you don't need Ralph and Kelly that much.
That's fair.
Our next question here is for Ralph and Kelly. What do you see as the most common type of complaint from blasting?
I think the most common type of complaint is a property damage allegation, and usually involves drywall. We've seen this reported over again in many studies throughout the years, where people actually have all sorts of cracks in their drywall or in their plaster within their home. They don't look at it. They don't notice it. All of a sudden, there's some blasting activity nearby, and they go to look at their plaster or their drywall. This crack's been there for 10 years, and all of a sudden, they just assume it's from blasting, and they make a complaint.
Yeah. I would tell you too, settlement issues, cracks in foundations or sidewalks, garage floors, things like that are just, happen with a lot of homes over time. A lot of the engineers we've worked with over the years, they'll tell you there's two types of concrete that's cracked and concrete that's going to crack, right? And it happens. And a lot of times, though, if there's blasting nearby, we get those claims and those allegations as part of the belief that blasting vibrations crack the concrete.
Sure. And Joe, what do you see in New York? Obviously, you're in a much different environment with a lot of high-rise structures.
Yeah, a lot of most of the masonry. We also have historic and landmark. Most of the we're used to doing close proximate blasting, and with the pre-site surveys, pretty much every building around a blast site has the pre-site surveys. So we've had a good record, which is super important, and we haven't had any real problems with any of the the cracking, and we're trying to bring the regulations in line with to make it's a win-win for everybody. Safer, the industry can do their work, and everybody goes home.
All right. Our next question is from Spencer, who's in Toronto. Have there been any thoughts on a regulator-based electronic blasting log system? So essentially a regulator-operated or regulator-controlled blasting log system.
Like a national system that would require every shot to be registered? Is that what's being asked?
I believe that's the question. Yeah.
I've not heard of that being proposed. I know that there's a lot of companies that are going with electric reporting systems for their own blasting records. But to my knowledge, there's not been a proposal to go on any type of a national or a state system that would require the blaster to plug into the information directly into a network. Joe, are you familiar with anything like that in New York?
No, we pretty much with the electronic systems and non-Ls, each company does it different. The most important thing to us is the right information is there. That's what we're looking for. Everybody has a little bit different system, and there's not necessarily have to be a standard form. We'll accept whatever, as long as everything is there. So, the electronic, we haven't any issues with it at all.
All right. Our next question is another one for Joe, and it comes from James in New Mexico. Joe, what was your most interesting movie pyro job you've seen or worked on?
That's a good one. Well, if you go into the pyro, a lot of the difference between fireworks and pyrotechnics, fireworks is probably the Macy's show, obviously, just because of the people don't realize they'll start planning that pretty much a year ahead of time. And you'll see the show in that last 25 minutes, but it's actually a year in the planning. It's they're there in New York City for over a month, loading and setting up for the show and all the logistics that are involved. Pyro, there's a lot of big explosions. I think one of the biggest ones we did was Boardwalk Empire, blew up the whole set at the end of for the last season finale. So that was done in New York.
And what do you figure a cost for something like that looks like, Joe? Do you have any idea?
It's a fortune. To rent just a street for a day in New York is about $10,000. So you can imagine, you got all the employees, all the production people. It's a lot. Yeah, it's a fortune.
All right. Our next question is another one for Joe. Why did you leave the industry to become a regulator, Joe?
That's a good question. The reason I left was obviously for new challenges, because there was a lot of it, everybody's used, there's certain blasting, but you got a ton of other lanes of explosives. So that was one reason. It was also because I saw a lot of the problems that occurred in the blasting industry. As we know, things are outdated, codes and licensing is outdated in a lot of places. So I thought maybe it could make a difference and obviously bring some of the new technology and the regulations and make it a win-win for everybody, where it's safer, the work can be done, and it's done safely. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to get into different challenges and make sure that try to make things a little bit better for everybody.
All right. Our next question is for both Ralph and Kelly, and it's coming from Dave in Wisconsin. How often is scale distance criteria a factor in your cases?
Well, we always approach a claim with a view of the blast records to determine whether or not the vibrations would have been capable of causing damage before we even look at a home. So from that perspective, knowing what the scale distance is, knowing what the PPV is in a shot tells you before you go out to the house or the property whether damage is even possible. So it's a significant factor.
But when we try to explain this to a jury, we try to simplify it and explain it, or a homeowner or property owner, as simply as possible. So, we prefer to have a seismograph reading and be able to talk about the seismograph reading, as opposed to try and explain what scale distance is to someone who, has no training or experience with blasting. So, we certainly look at it, evaluate it in cases where they don't have a seismograph and they're shooting to scale distance. We will obviously analyze that, factor that in, and explain it. But we just, for our purposes and explaining it to a layperson or a juror, we try to avoid as much technical jargon as possible.
But having that information is important in evaluating the overall likelihood of any damage before you even go out and look at the property, obviously.
Sure. Now, Joe, in your case, where you're a regulator, how what are you looking for in the blasters planning to ensure that we're realistically thinking that damage is not going to occur?
Well, most of the things we initially look for is the science behind it, that all the numbers match, all the they're not going to go over the limits. That's pretty much what we're initially looking for. Coming from the industry, I understand completely what the blasters go through in the field. We want to make sure the test blasting works out, obviously, from the blast plan. But that's just a skeleton. That's a guideline for what's going to happen. In reality, what's going to happen, as we know, like in New York, the environment's going to change. The footprint's going to change. The rock is going to change. In New York, it changes every 2 feet. You can do all the borehole testing you want, but it's going to change and it's overlapped. So I'm looking for basically a generic plan where the science is good behind it. The calculations are all accurate. And that's why I was saying to reach out to subject matter experts, because we all miss things. And usually if everybody peers review it and they come back with the same numbers, you got a good plan in place. And then it's a matter of being out there in the field and keeping an eye on things and making sure that when you see, the more sets of eyes, the better. We're only another set of eyes. That's what I look at it as. We're at a set of eyes. If we see something that somebody missed, we're going to try to make sure it's corrected before it becomes a disaster. And we've had knock on wood, we've had a great record for that reason, is we're actually out there in the field. We don't, we try to keep everything as under the guidance of us, but not, we're not going to tell them exactly what to do.
All right. Our next question is for Ralph and Kelly, and this comes from Brian in Kentucky. As you've been going through the shot reports and related documents, what have you found that you would consider bizarre, comical, or downright strange?
You do see, most often you see a failure to put in information into a blast record, such as location of the blast itself, which is not comical unless you're trying to go back and reconstruct what happened in part of a lawsuit. From a comedy side, what we see mostly is when people videotape blasts.
Yeah, and if they do, then typically under most states, those videos become part of the blast record that has to be maintained and available. And Ralph and I have reviewed videos where typically the video is not the problem. The shot goes off as designed and planned. It's the commentary that you pick up from people around the shot or around the camera that becomes entertaining. And I'm not sure what the rating is for our series here, so we won't go into any details about some of the things that we've heard.
We're going to keep this a general audience conversation.
Let's just say a hot mic is not a great idea around a bunch of blasters. Just put it that way. So that is entertaining when we get to listen to all those audios and videos that go along with the blast that we investigate.
Sure. Our next question here is for Joe, and it comes from Mike in Minnesota. What advice would you have for a young professional just getting started?
Okay. Hey, Mike, that's a good question. When I was a kid, they always told you to go into an industry you can make money in. I tell everybody, figure out what you love doing and then figure out how to make money at it. And the most important thing is that you don't get locked into it. There's plenty of lanes of explosives and plenty of different angles. If you could be in the blasting industry, you could be a regulator. You could be an EOD. You could be in pyrotechnics, fireworks. So you got to explore and try different things. And every single, even though it seems like a different lane, the basics are the same. The basics are there. So you could jump from blasting is the most complicated. Once you have a blasting background, a lot of things are very similar. You could easily learn the pyro end of it. It's harder to go from obviously pyro and fireworks to blasting. But I tell everybody, try different things, see what you love doing, and then figure out how to make money at it.
Travis noticed that he didn't mention the legal profession as one of those recommendations.
Listen,
I will say, after watching Joe's presentation, it does look like he's having a lot more fun than we are.
That's true.
I guess, Joe and Kelly, do you have any advice for somebody that might want to follow in your career?
I would say the same thing that Joe said. You know, it really is about developing a passion for something. We were very lucky to get into an industry that's exciting, ever-changing, with some really interesting people to work with. And if you've got that, you'll have a successful career no matter what you go into.
All right, our final question. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Okay. Oh, no, I was just going to say, I could have used Kelly and Ralph when I was younger, but I don't really need them that much now.
We don't do any criminal work, Joe.
Okay. But one thing is with the younger generation, just work hard. That you'll get your breaks and then that's it. Once you get your break, then work for them. People have been the previous webinars and they've said the same thing. Basically that's it. You get your opportunity and go with it. I just fell into this basically. Wasn't looking for it, just happened upon me. And and then I took it took it as far as I wanted to take. It's up to you. Get the education, use the resources of ISEE and so on. Absolutely.
There's a lot of resources out there. I can't speak enough to reach out to folks that have been doing this. That's the way to learn this. Right. I think, Joe, you pointed out that blasting is half science and half experience and art. And right. It's not something that you just simply read about and go apply. So it's definitely important to lean on folks that know what they're doing.
Absolutely. Very important. Very important. Nothing beats field experience. It's totally different. You could read everything you want to book, and that's great. But when you get that field experience, you're actually out there getting dirty and getting wet and all that. Nowadays, it's hard to find people who want to do that anymore. But that's when you really earn your stripes.
All right. Well, that is about all the time we have for this question and answer session. I want to thank everybody online here for throwing in some great questions and joining us tonight to talk about how we regulate and report on the use of explosives. I want to thank Joe and Kelly and Ralph for their time in helping put on this session. I think it was a fantastic insight to the nuances and challenges of how we regulate and monitor and report the use of explosives.
So thanks, Travis, and thank you for watching this episode of the ISEE Explosives Everyday series. Explosives are the ultimate power tool that help mine the minerals and materials that are used in creating many of the products and roadways we use each and every day. They help keep our towns and cities safe from avalanches. They are used to shape and improve the environment, and also in military and demolition applications. And they're in some of our favourite TV shows, movies, sporting events and concerts. Our job as professionals in the explosive industry and at the ISEE is to ensure explosives continue to be handled and applied in the safest way possible, and to continue to provide the resources and tools needed to help advance the science and art of explosive engineering. If you're interested in finding out more about the International Society of Explosive Engineers, please go to our website, isee.org. You'll find information about membership, our chapters around the world and other useful links, including a calendar of upcoming events, as well as conferences and meetings in our industry. Another great resource is the World of Explosives, where you can find information on using explosives safely, the most frequently asked questions from homeowners about blasting, how blast vibrations affect structures, and all the planning that goes into each blast. It's also home to Explosives the Power Tool. This is a video series covering the history of explosives and the technical advancements that have been made possible because of them. To check it out, visit explosives.org. Once again, a special thank you to this episode's sponsors, LDE Global, Dyno Nobel, OPIT Blast, Nobel Insurance and the EFEE, and to all our sponsors throughout this series. Before we go, here are a few short words from one of our series partners, LDE Global.
The ownership group of LDE Global has been developing, patenting and supplying explosives internationally for 50 years. In 1999, following invitations and support from international mining groups, LDE entered the North American explosives market with a range of low-density, low-shock explosives known as hybrid explosives. These are ideally suited for the huge variation of rock types and mining methods across the United States. As a completely independent supplier of explosive products, technologies, equipment and consulting services, we'd like to say thank you for watching and feel free to call us at any time.
I think the courses here are very informative for both the management as well as shot fires. Atmosphere is fantastic as always at ISEE, and that is why I have come many times to the conference.
So that's it for this episode of Explosives Every Day. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube, Facebook and LinkedIn pages to stay up to date with all the latest ISEE happenings. And be sure to check out all 10 of our episodes highlighting the different ways explosives are used around the world every day. On behalf of the ISEE, thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.